ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to BW Legal World's Saturday Solution segment, where we speak with experts on hot legal topics and latest legal developments. In today, we are discussing 5 recent landmark judgments from Supreme Court of India and their impact on international commercial arbitration. In words of Justice Subramanian, arbitration ecosystem is vital for ease of doing business. If a conducive environment is created favoring arbitration, then it will definitely improve climate for investments. To make this happen, we are joined by Senior Advocate Mr. Percival Bilomoria. Percival Bilomoria, popularly known as Percy Bilomoria, is a door tenant at the Outer Template Chambers, London, and is also a chartered accountant by qualification. He is known for his extensive experience as an arguing counsel in adversarial matters concerning both litigation and arbitration. We're also joined by Mr. Basant Rajasekharan, partner of Phoenix Legal. Mr. Rajasekharan specializes in domestic and international commercial arbitration with a vast experience of representing clients from numerous jurisdictions in high-stake arbitrations under the rules of all major arbitral institutions as well as ad hoc arbitrations. Known for his skills both in arbitration and litigation matters, Mr. Rajasekharan has been regularly representing clients across various industries, including energy, construction, and urban development projects. We are also joined by Mr. Divyam Agarwal, partner Jyoti Sagar Associates. Divyam is a dual qualified Indian advocate and English solicitor. Divyam is a specialist in international commercial arbitration and has a broad practice advising and representing corporates and financial institutions in disputes under commercial contracts. Divyam has significant experience of complex, large-scale, contentious mandates and has a wide-range practice based on managing both arbitration and commercial litigation. We also have with us Gohar Mirza, partner Shadu Amarchand Mangaldas. Gohar focuses on international and domestic commercial arbitration and corporate litigation. He has represented private and public corporations before various judicial fora and in ad hoc and institutional arbitrations in a wide range of disputes with respect to infrastructure and real estate industry, shareholders agreement, partnership deed, license agreements, land acquisition, and more. Experts, once again, a very warm welcome to all of you and to our audiences joining us across various platforms. I am Ashrama Ori, Managing Editor of BW Legal World, who has the honor of moderating this August session. So let's dive right into the conversation with opening comments from our panelists. Panelists, can we confidently say that gone are the days when inept laws laid siege to commercial disputes in India? I think India is making some great strides in the right direction, but let's hear it from you. What are your thoughts on where India is in current times? So we'll start with Mr. Percy Bilomoria. So your comments, please.
Well, I think there has been a lot of progress. There have been several amendments, for example, to the Arbitration Act since it was first enacted. But I'm afraid a lot of these amendments throw up more questions than they really solve. So one of the main misconceptions about arbitration, which prevails even if you read some of the judicial orders, there is an impression that arbitration is cheaper and quicker than court litigation. I don't know of any international jurisdiction which propounds this particular theory. The reality is it is not. The arbitration started, that was initially the objective of international commercial arbitration, but the reality is that it takes longer and it's probably much more expensive. I think it's a misconception because there was no court fee, but then most institutional arbitrations have an institution fee, which is fairly meager. It's not arm and a leg, but then there are many other incidental expenses. You need expert testimony and transcripts, etc. So this popular misconception is something that we have to do away with. Secondly, there is still a lot of controversy. Our 96 Act is based on the UN Citral model law. And like in all common law jurisdictions, the jurisprudence has been evolving. And in fact, some of the jurisprudence that we are looking at today will show that there has been a lot of confusion on certain very elementary aspects, which the courts are of course trying to sort out. But the sooner it's concluded one way or the other, the better.
Thank you, Mr. Bilamoria. Moving to Mr. Rajasekharan. Mr. Rajasekharan, do you also agree that judgments have opened a can of worms rather than solving a lot of things here?
Yeah, I agree with Percy. Having said that, we have taken a baby steps to make India as a investment hub or arbitration hub. And towards that, the government, at least the present regime, has taken a lot of steps, like, the trained arbitrators, the paucity of trained arbitrators has been addressed. And there is a cabinet note which is circulating in the legal circle about the government related party, wherever the government is a party to the arbitration, they want to go for institutional arbitration. And plus, you have the government has created an infrastructure, trying to create an infrastructure towards institutional arbitration. Having said that, compared to the the legal system, the court system in India, we have Supreme Court as on date, as per the statistics, almost 75,000 cases pending, and in the High Court 60 lakh cases pending. We have a judge population ratio of 21 judges per million population. So compared to the court system, I would say that arbitration is costly, but the cost reward ratio is much more tilted towards the favor of the client going to initiate arbitration. Plus, once we have an institutionalized bar and institutional arbitration, I think we can make India as an arbitration hub. And coupled with, I will take a minute more to drive home this point. For example, I will quote SIAC, Singapore International Arbitration Center. In the year 2020, as per their annual report, the case load was 1,080 cases. 1,080. Out of that, India constituted almost 690 cases, which is almost 70%. So there is an opportunity in India because amount of 70% of the arbitration is being arbitrated in outside India because of lack of arbitral institution in India. So with that thought, I would leave it to the other panelists to dwell forward on this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rajasekharan. Cost reward, certainly. Gauhar, over to you for your comments, please, on this.
So as Percy rightly pointed out, and even Vasant pointed out correctly, arbitration of course comes with a cost, but it reduces the court exposure. But that also becomes a myth ultimately in India. When we get an award, we challenge it as a matter of routine. I have never, at least as a lawyer, as a practicing lawyer, I try to convince my client to accept the award, but they always want to challenge it because they have a remedy, they want to exercise it. So that idea of just litigating all the time and ultimately that ego that comes in, which takes over the business decision, is something everybody has to work on. Secondly, if you see, as Vasant pointed out, a very good ratio, 21 judges to 1 million population. Most of these are commercial matters that are coming in court recently. Past 2-3 years, we've only seen commercial matters coming to court, and they're all getting major backlogs. So whether we will make arbitration a more practical way of resolving disputes, I would say we are far from that dream. But yes, we are stepping towards it. Also, I would say that this judgment of Amazon, if you see the Delhi High Court judgment, which was later on the same, you see the judge's idea behind this judgment and behind the idea of accepting the emergency arbitrator was more business focused. So judges are also, and even lawyers are becoming more business focused, that business has to go on. And if we go with that approach, I think everyone will one day make arbitration the most preferred choice, and we will all have a faster resolution of dispute rather than spending money on litigation, on lawyers. We are happy people give us money, but ultimately business has to be seen. So that's my view on it.
Thank you, Gauhar. Absolutely. Centering on business, Divyam, your views, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start this by just quoting Sir Herbert Reid. He once said that I can imagine no society which does not embody some method of arbitration. While India introduced arbitration as a method, rudimentary dereliction of both at the level of legislature and the judiciary, which was alluded to by my co-panelist, that has added madness to the method. Justice Nariman said that Indian arbitration has moved zigzag crab-like course. It has moved forward, it has moved backwards, and sometimes it has moved sideways. So, and now just let me add some statistics also to what I just mentioned, that World Bank in their ranking of doing business, India is ranked 63. Surprisingly, in the same rankings for enforcement of contract in India, India is ranked 163. Clearly, there is a lack of investors' confidence in our judicial system. Last 2 years, Supreme Court did a conscious course correction in the arbitration regime and, in fact, produced path-breaking judgments, which I believe that will pave way for India becoming a favored destination. But I completely second the view taken by all the panelists here that there is, it's not that the regime is without fault. There are divots in the landscape and they have to be filled and smooth over. There are issues with respect to the arbitration centers. India is, if you see the survey done by Queen Mary University some time back, the favored institutes are ICC, SIAC, and HKIAC, and these are the preferred institutions. India has basically no role in any one of them. Similarly, the issue of the challenges to arbitral awards, again, the arbitral award challenges take 5 years, 10 years, and they just keep going on. So time has come that we not only act in a robust manner, as Gauhar said, that we really need to ensure that there is, you look at from a business mindset, and you should see it from a commercial landscape perspective, and therefore we should move in the right direction. And hopefully the judgments, the forward-looking judgments which we have seen in the last 1 or 2 years, they keep coming, and the legislature also takes the same course going forward.
Thank you, Divyam. Thank you so much. Clearly, the courts are clogged and infrastructure is, lacking. But are the judgments boding well for India? We'll start with Percy Billamoria. Mr. Billamoria, looking at Amazon future case. Now, what is so path-breaking about the judgment? If you can have your views on how that really puts together international commercial arbitration for India.
An emergency arbitrator is a mechanism that institution will adopt. So if one of the parties, where there's an arbitration agreement, has agreed to adopt institutional rules, the problem was that setting up the tribunal takes a little time. And sometimes the parties may not have adequate time to wait. So therefore, this mechanism of emergency arbitrator evolved, and nowadays it's done in a matter of 24 to 48 hours. So in a way, it is the same thing as going to a court of law and saying, I want emergency interim relief. So just because an arbitrator is an emergency arbitrator does not mean he's not an arbitrator. I have argued this proposition before. And, the difficulty was that the Law Commission had recommended that the Act be amended to say that emergency arbitrators are also arbitrators. And that recommendation did not happen. But because the recommendation didn't happen doesn't mean that we do not recognize emergency arbitrators. Maybe there is adequate provision in the law itself. So the amendment was not required in the first place, because if an emergency arbitrator is not considered to be on par with the arbitral tribunal, then you are not following the rules of the institution, and the parties have actually elected to follow the rules of the institution. So I think this was a legal anomaly, and I think this decision correctly states that just because the Act was not amended does not mean that the Act doesn't provide for it. It says, in fact, that any kind of award by an emergency arbitrator is under 17.1. 17.1 is a provision in our law where arbitrators can pass interim orders. So it is on par with Indian law, and therefore, to say that I will not recognize an emergency arbitrator, I'll only recognize the panel, when you have already agreed to follow the rules of the institution. Now, if the rules of the institution provide this mechanism, then you are bound to follow that. So it's a very logical argument, and I think it is just a little slight legal anomaly. I think if you look at the law, it's not an anomaly, but it was just something that people were trying to take advantage of. We've always had this thing about okay, so interim orders are not enforceable, only awards are enforceable. So therefore, please request the arbitrator, while passing an interim order, to call it a partial award. Use the word award, because under our law, then it will get enforceable. So these are the little delicate situations that sometimes blow up into large disputes, and this is an excellent decision, which is really the way it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Pillamore. Also inviting thoughts on this from Mr. Rajasekharan. Mr. Rajasekharan, parliamentary sanction was missing for Section 17(1)(a) and emergency arbitrator amendment, like Percy just mentioned. So, what is really the gap that has been plugged by this judgment? And in your opinion, how does it really affect companies or disputants now?
Just to add to what Percy said, the Act doesn't define emergency arbitrator. So the losing party tried to exploit this gray area. And however, it is not gray for our practitioners, arbitration practitioners especially. As Percy pointed out, 246 Law Commission report indeed recommended inclusion of definition of emergency arbitrator. But for Parliament in its own wisdom decided not to give effect to it. But Justice Nariman being Justice Nariman, so he sort of harmoniously interpreted, and he relied on that Avitel post-studio judgment to give effect to the Law Commission report also. Plus, he sort of harmoniously interpreted the various scheme of the provisions of Arbitration Act, for example, Section 2(1)(d), Section 2(6), Section 2(8), and Section 19(2). He conjointly read and he came to a conclusion that emergency arbitrator itself, comes under the definition of an arbitrator. So, therefore, this judgment sets in a right direction, and it will sort of encourage emergency arbitration. Plus, the most fundamental takeaway as an arbitration practitioner from my side would be the party autonomy has been upheld time and again. This time with a lot of emphasis, because we have series of judgment as panelists and everyone know, starting from Centro Trade, Balco Kesar Aluminium, and Ashwini Minda case, the party autonomy has been upheld. But in this case, both parties willingly adopted SIAC as rules of arbitration. They choose a venue also. With parties choosing, and the institutional rules provides for emergency arbitration, they can't come back and say that emergency arbitration is not defined under the scheme of the Act. So therefore, the Supreme Court ruling, as far as this judgment is concerned, sets the right tone for big conglomerates opting for institutional arbitration and going to resolve the disputes in a speedier manner.
Absolutely, and just to kind of put more perspective on this, Mr. Rajasekharan, how is this qualify? How does any dispute qualify as an emergency relief or measure, and then as a normal dispute that goes into the to the court?
See, the relief for as and when the parties have arbitration agreement in the contract, we have two options. If you have institutional arbitration, you can immediately constitute an arbitral tribunal and go for a emergency arbitration. So, as Percy rightly said, it is coming under Section 17(1) for getting relief from the emergency arbitral tribunal. But similarly, interim relief before the court also can be obtained under Section 9. So the problem with the international commercial arbitration is since it's international commercial arbitration, one of the parties is a foreign party. People have to go to the Supreme Court for an appointment of an arbitral tribunal. So with a clogging pendency, from our experience, it may take between 6 months to 1.5 years to appoint an arbitral tribunal. So therefore, emergency arbitral tribunal with the institutional arbitration is much more flexible for the parties, and also it doesn't bar parties from exploring under Section 9. So it is a party's option. If it involves a mini trial, adducing evidence, establishing a prima facie case, parties can go for a Section 17 if they go for institutional arbitration. And if in the absence of institutional arbitration, parties adopted ad hoc arbitration, they can go for a Section 9 and get a relief.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Rajasekharan. Also inviting Gauhar's views on this. Gauhar, a good point there on the timeline differences. 6 months to a year to really reducing it to 24 to 48 hours, as Percy mentioned. So, what are your thoughts on this, and what are some of the practical instances that we can take from this judgment going forward?
See, my take on the time aspect is that every party who is a party to that dispute knows their position and their stand. It is just about who wants to drag it and who wants to make the other party feel a little drained. So I think when you go for emergency arbitration, you are genuinely going and referring a dispute to somebody who will resolve it for you. If not, then as I'll just come back to the judgment again, if you've noticed the single judge's points, that technicality of various things that arbitral tribunal doesn't include emergency arbitrator, or the agreement was not signed between a party. All these things were said completely ignored and rather dealt with very properly by the judge, saying that, see, you are into a business. You entered into this agreement knowing fully well that various other parties will come into this business. You cannot take this technical ground that I did not sign an agreement, therefore this emergency order or this order by the emergency arbitrator will not be applicable. So coming back on the timelines, you see, the judge has also carved a way to tell the parties that, see, don't raise these technical issues. If you are genuinely thinking that there is a dispute which has to be resolve it in 2 days. Why not 2 days? Why do you even want to push it beyond 2 days? If you are right, you will get an order in your favor. So instead of that, people go to courts. As Vasant sir rightly pointed out, it takes 3 to 6 months, and some parties who are not very genuine about their disputes rather use that as a delay tactic. So I would say that yes, everybody should get their dispute resolved in 2 days. So that's what my take on it would be.
Thanks, God. Thank you so much. Coming back to Mr. Bilimoria on this, Mr. Bilimoria, how do you see this judgment now delving further into the judgment and looking at the facts and the ratio of the judgment? How do you see this judgment really impacting our ease of doing business in India or the arbitration ecosystem of India? What were the things that we were in the gray earlier about, and now how are we proceeding?
So, in many commercial disputes, sometimes the need of the hour is to obtain emergency interim relief. So, you heard Gaurav saying that, Section 9 affords that relief. But even Section 9 now, after the amendment, really says that once a tribunal is constituted, it is up to the tribunal to decide on that interim relief. Here, the issue really was an emergency arbitrator does not constitute a tribunal. Now, if you look at the definition of arbitral tribunal, it says either a sole arbitrator or a panel, right? And it is ultimately at the end of the day, if you have agreed to follow institutional rules, you cannot elect to follow some rules and not follow the other. So I think this is the single biggest message here, where you can't just say that you can't pick and choose depending on what outcome you think will be favorable to you. Institutional rules are agreed to between the parties. Arbitration is a consensual process driven by party autonomy. So therefore, once you have agreed, you cannot be allowed to go back on that consensus and say, I will not adopt this particular rule.
And what does this mean for India as such? This is an institutional rule. Only comes into effect if you ascribe to a certain institution for your arbitrations. Now, what does this mean for Indian-based arbitrations, and where is the gap? Do you see a gap there, and what are your thoughts on that?
Look, the point is in India, and in fact, there's another decision that recently came out, which I think we are also talking about, where two Indian parties can elect for foreign seated arbitration as opposed to domestic arbitration. And in that, it has been clarified that even in that situation, we have access to Section 9. So typically Section 9 is in Part 1, which is concerned with domestic arbitration, and Part 2 is concerned with foreign awards under the New York Convention. So as far as Indian, I don't see too much of a difference as far as interim relief is concerned on whether it's a foreign award, a foreign seated arbitration, or a domestic arbitration. But really the message that goes forward is party autonomy, and therefore contracts have to be enforced in the correct spirit that they were intended.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Bilimoria, and also inviting Mr. Rajasekharan's views on this. Mr. Bilimoria mentioned contracts. How do the dispute resolution clauses look after this judgment? Do you see any changes in how those would be drafted?
Yeah, a lot of activities post the judgment. But having said that, unfortunately, India doesn't have such robust institutional arbitration like that of SIAC or ICC or LCA. Having said that, the latest judgment which said that two Indian parties can choose a seat of arbitration outside India. At least we indeed amended almost more than 2-3 dozen contract clauses between big conglomerates to get benefit of this judgment, as well as to get benefit of the institutional arbitration rules, especially the SIAC rules and the HKIC rules.
All right, Mr. Rajasingh, thank you so much. Gohar, again, inviting your views on the same question. What does this mean going forward for conglomerates, the dispute resolution clauses, or the shift in actually moving India-based arbitrations to actually foreign-seated arbitrations? Is that going to be a step back for India?
I would not say a step back. It's actually throwing more light on what is required for us to develop, and we have to reflect upon our system. If we have to follow a system which is abroad and not in India, it's just showing us the path. Let's see, this is going wrong, you have to improve upon that. So in my view, this judgment, of course, sets the tone right. Also gives a very, as I said earlier, it gives a very business-oriented perspective, shuts down technicalities and those typical lawyer-type objections, and shows that, see, when you have to resolve your dispute, you have to do it in this manner. Or you go and file a civil suit. Do not have arbitration in your agreements. Go file a civil suit, pay court fee, and let the matter linger on for 20 years in court. So if you want arbitration, come forward and do it in the right manner, I think is what everybody on the panel will also agree is the tone of this judgment. And that will help us reflect more on what we are doing and help us grow further the field.
Thank you, Gohar. Mr. Bilimoria, another question on how does an arbitrator or the panel or the tribunal decide on what constitutes as an emergent issue? Is there some sort of a screening of these issues? What is practically coming out of this judgment? And if you were to advise to a general counsel or a company here on how to settle their disputes about it, what would be those few practical advices to them?
So interim orders are meant to only protect the subject matter of the arbitration. So the idea is that there's no point litigating if you are really shutting the stable door after a horse is bolted, right? So I think it's incumbent on the parties to show that that the subject matter of the arbitration deserves to be protected. So there's a prima facie case. And thereafter, it must be shown that it is imperative that it be done in an emergency way, because otherwise it will be too late. So, for example, if there is let's say a transaction that you are trying to stop, then there has to be some material on record to show that if the emergency award is not granted, or in fact the interim injunction is not granted, then there will be nothing left. The substratum of the dispute is destroyed. So it's a question of balance of convenience and whether there's a prima facie case to ask for that in the first place. But in most emergency arbitration, what happens is the emergency arbitrator does not really decide the matter. If the injunction is granted, it can be revisited by the tribunal. So if you have agreed to a 3-member tribunal, and there is a single emergency arbitrator who grants an interim injunction, that interim injunction is only till the tribunal is constituted and takes a second hard look at it. So it's not that it's an issue which is open and shut forever. We had that situation in Indian courts because a lot of people were seeking Section 9 relief, and then once they got the injunction, then they were not initiating the arbitration altogether. But now the law has been amended to prevent that kind of an occurrence. So I think it's important. I think the principles of injunction law are the same. Emergency arbitrator is only a tool to speed up the process, because sometimes constituting a tribunal takes time. There are certain procedural hurdles and some preliminary objections that come in that have to be considered.
Absolutely. So it takes away from the burden of the court, you would say.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Villamoria. Coming back to Mr. Rajasekharan. Mr. Rajasekharan, once the emergency arbitrations are recognized under the Arbitration Act, how would the legislature reconcile the provisions contained in Section 9 and 17? Would love to know your views on that.
Presently, I don't think we need of any reconciliation because of the judgment in the Amazon case. Having said that, still, we need to sort of harmoniously, interpret and give effect to the judgment of Nariman in the Amazon case, especially with respect to 2.1d and 2.6 and 2.8, as well as the institution of emergency arbitration, basically. Because Section 9 and 17 is almost on the same interplay here. So we need to somewhere, because 17.2 is not appealable as per Nariman judgment under 37. So 9, whereas 9 is appealable under 37. So these kind of anomalies have to be, we need to see how it unfolds. But the Parliament has to take a proactive approach and get the input from the professionals in the Law Commission, and accordingly give a holistic interpretation to avoid any future controversies on this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Rajasekharan. Go ahead. Mr. Rajasekharan mentioned some of the anomalies. Now, what are the kind of challenges that one can expect at the stage of enforcement of an emergency arbitral award?
So challenges so far as this particular case was concerned was one of where to enforce it, because a party who's not even accepting the emergency arbitrator, will they even follow the order passed? And I'll just take a cue from what Vasant was saying. Why we need Section 9 still is because a court's order injuncting a party is still, at least in the Indian scenario, is seen as a bigger issue rather than an arbitrator sitting in Singapore or in London. So keeping that aside, I would say that so far as enforcement is concerned, we would still need the court's help in enforcing such an order against a party who was really not very happy about the order being passed in the first instance. For example, this one of the respondents who raised the objection of the arbitration agreement not being with them. How would you enforce it? They will never accept a private arbitrator's view or order. You have to go to court and get it enforced in a particular way, and you get judgments like this. So that I think would be still a requirement for enforcement, and we need those kind of checks and balances still, and we can't get away with courts in that sense.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you for that input. Mr. Villamoria, again, your views on this. You mentioned that some of the judgments have sort of opened can of worms. Do you also believe that there is, you're wanted for more in this judgment left, to see some more sort of breakthrough points coming? What are your thoughts?
Not necessarily in this decision, because I think it's an excellent ratio that has been decided correctly. But there are some other controversies. So one of the controversy that you will be familiar with is enforcement, because as was mentioned on the panel earlier, the losing party always thinks that they have to appeal, and that's because in the court of law they always have more than one bite at the chain, and they are used to the question of going to appeal somewhere, having some kind of higher authority to bear down on the matter and say, okay, this decision was wrong. And now, they are finding that, look, an award is an award. A tribunal is really the last arbitrator of facts, at least. It's only in 34 when you look at domestic arbitration that you have the ground of patent illegality. So that's always it's a big issue. At the same time, I must tell you that some of the domestic awards that we see are horrid. I don't think too many people will say this, but I have no hesitation in telling you that they belong in the dustbin. And that's a pity, and it's a problem with the entire system, because one is, unlike LCIA, which is London seated arbitration, or SIAC, which is Singapore seated, we don't have one single institution. I think one of the biggest problems that even some of these amendments have grappled with is what to do about the multiplicity of institutions. So, if you have a situation where every failed lawyer and his dog have an arbitration institution, you have at least 33 institutions in the country. So, then there was a move to set up a system to evaluate which institution is the right institution to go to, or is accredited, so to speak. And those provisions haven't really been implemented. And there were huge question marks about how they were to be evaluated, on what criteria, and the composition of the committee that was supposed to evaluate. Because if you see the report based on which his amendment was made, the composition suggested there was quite different. So these are some of the typical Indian problems that we have. Again, there's a lot to be desired in terms of practice. So in domestic arbitration, it's very unusual to have parties agree on transcripts because there's an additional cost to that. But given the fact that arbitration proceedings are really closed door, and I can tell you that even international arbitration has been criticized for this reason, that it is just men in black suits sitting in conference rooms, taking very major crucial decisions. That's one criticism. And the other criticism, of course, which came from the former Chief Justice of England, where he said that how does common law evolve? Because if confidentiality is an issue and awards cannot be shared, of course now institutions are working out a methodology to redact confidential information, and the awards are available, but it's not judicial precedent. So how does common law evolve? So these are the two main criticisms of arbitration. And I think transcripts and proper process, we all are very fond of saying due process is the name of the game. But how do you have due process when there are so many processes in the country which are adopted? And you see, at the time of making the choice of the institution, the arbitration clause is the sunset clause. It's the last clause to be inked. Transaction people often tell you that, well, we are not looking at the dispute clause because we are doing this deal not thinking that we are going to go into dispute, which is fair. But ultimately, most of the disputes are because of pathological arbitration clauses. That's the other problem. So these are some practical issues, and one of the main practical issues is this: when you have an arbitration clause, it has to be enforced. That doesn't just mean that the award has to be enforced, but any party disregarding the clause and going to court in complete disregard, that cannot be allowed. That's traditional wisdom, right? But then the point is that arbitration is a little more complex animal. There can be different laws that govern the arbitration agreement. There can be different laws that govern the arbitration process in the dispute resolution process. So, and because these are all cross-jurisdiction transactions which are arbitrated, international commercial arbitration, which is one of the exceptions to the New York Convention that India has subscribed to along with 50 odd countries. So there are many peculiar problems that come in. And I'll just mention very quickly two of these. One is, there is, people often write language to say, before going to arbitration, you will try to mediate the issue and settle it. Right? And there is no time frame given. Now, if you don't have a time frame, what happens is that one party tries to drag the issue in mediation so that limitation sets in. And then later, when you go to arbitration, you argue that it is barred by limitation. And if one party pulls the plug on the mediation, they say, okay, the pre-arbitration mechanism was not followed. And in fact, this is one of the bigger issues which result in practically, which cause a lot of time to be wasted before the tribunal actually kicks off. The tribunal will be appointed and there are jurisdictional challenges, etc. The other aspect is suppose a party does go to court. Now, what is the scope of the court's examination? Are they supposed to only look at the existence of the arbitration agreement and say, no, there is an arbitration agreement, I see this particular clause here, please go to arbitration? In which case, there is no judicial application of mind, it's really a rubber stamp. And this was at the heart of the old dispute where, when you went to court under Section 11 to appoint an arbitrator, because the other party was dragging its feet and not appointing an arbitrator. Or you had a sole arbitrator you didn't agree upon, so you told the court to appoint an arbitrator. So the question is, are you supposed to just look at the clause and say, okay, arbitration, everything else the tribunal decides? The doctrine of competence apparently suggests that this should be the case. But then there are some very difficult issues. And arbitrability of a contract is one of them. So the question of whether a dispute that you have is arbitrable or not in the first place is a very major issue. And I think now Indian courts are fairly settled on the point that if there is a question of whether it is arbitrable or not, it will be decided by the court that is looking at the issue in the first place, which is just as well. Because not all kinds of disputes lend themselves to arbitration.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Billimoria, for enlightening us on all the issues looming large over the arbitration ecosystem of India. Mr. Rajasekharan, before we close the loop on this judgment, any of your thoughts on, to add to the issues that we are speaking of as of now?
Just to add 2-3 points. One is we need to have a dedicated resource center with appropriate governmental support. Second is we need to have infrastructure, that is training the arbitrators, because we have a lack of specialized arbitrators available. And the third is autonomous body for accreditation of arbitral institute, because as Percy said, we have almost 33. If we count more deeply, it may run into hundreds. So we need to have, set of very reputed, specialized institutional mechanism. And of course, we need to have a bar and bench for arbitration. So these are my concluding thoughts on this issue of institutional arbitration and emergency arbitration.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rajasekharan. Wonderful thoughts on this one judgment that we've discussed at length. Now, moving to Divyam, for more such judgments that have come in the wake of the new trend of making India an arbitration hub. So, Divyam, what are the few other judgments that we can look at?
So, I think whatever I've listened so far on the panel, the panelists the theme so far seems to be twofold. One is party autonomy, and second is proper mechanism for enforcement of arbitral awards. So insofar as party autonomy is concerned, Supreme Court has passed a very important judgment in PSEL Wind's case, where what they have actually addressed an issue which has been lingering on for literally 2 decades now. One of the most common question we as lawyers face: if a party autonomy is real, why 2 Indian parties cannot arbitrate outside of India? This conundrum was introduced by a dubious interpretation in TDM infrastructure case, which was a Section 11 case, unfortunately. And this was coupled by a lack of clarity by any other decision of the highest court. Supreme Court has finally now clarified that two Indian parties are free to choose any neutral forum outside India to arbitrate their disputes. They're also free to choose the applicable procedure in substantive law. Thus, the decision prioritizes the two vital concepts in arbitration, party autonomy and freedom of contract, over the vague and undefined grounds of public policy. Till date, it was a given position that Indians cannot, by way of contract, escape the applicability of Indian law. However, this position has now been visited by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has held that the Arbitration and the Contract Act do not militate against choosing a foreign seat of arbitration or against choosing the procedural and substantive law of the parties would be subject to. I must say this is qualified by the fact that the conflict of law provisions continue to apply. The choice of parties cannot prejudice the application of those laws of India that cannot be derogated from by agreement. I would say with this move, the judiciary has stepped towards bringing India's arbitration landscape in line with international best practices and the pro-enforcement arbitration model contemplated under the New York Convention. The decision also has wider public policy ramifications, I would say. The court has thrown its weight behind the notion that a court must balance and weigh a private right against public order. Where a private bargain does not cause harm to the public order, the court must allow for private bargain to flourish. That is the whole concept behind a commercial understanding and party autonomy. The judgment, I would say, is also significant to Indian subsidiaries of international businesses who now have greater freedom in their choice of dispute resolution options for commercial contracts. Even for that matter, Indian companies doing business internationally will have this flexibility now to go to popular jurisdictions like Singapore, London, New York. And there is also an opportunity for businesses to refresh their approach to dispute resolution clauses. But having said so, I also believe that it's a double-edged sword. One way you're saying that you want to make India as the arbitration hub, and on the same count, you are saying that, hey, listen, you're two Indian people, please go out and arbitrate outside India. So that fine balance needs to be seen and see how it pans out in going forward. So that's one judgment on party autonomy. Let's also now see another judgment where enforcement of a award was being taken to light. It's Gemini Bay transcription of Supreme Court. This is the decision which Supreme Court has sought to bring the Indian enforceability regime in tune with the New York Convention. Supreme Court has delivered a judgment circumscribing the role of the courts in enforcement proceedings under Part 2 of the Arbitration Act. I would say decision is indicative of the application of the principle of minimal judicial intervention in arbitration. It also reiterates that courts should construe the grounds of challenge to arbitral awards narrowly and must not go into the substance of the award. Where an award has been passed as per the applicable substantive law, it is not open to courts to consider a challenge on that ground, and it is contrary to the applicable substantive law. In fact, I would say it defeats the very purpose of having an arbitration at the very first place. Also, just one more point on it, that a foreign award may only be challenged under the grounds prescribed under 48, which in my personal view is still very, very wide. I mean, you would want to narrow it down even further. And when enforcement of foreign award is sought, the factors to be proved before the courts must be limited to procedural in nature. They cannot demonstrate that what are the substantive issues and how those substantive issues are dealt with. You cannot basically have as Percy was also saying, don't have a second bite at the apple. This is not what is expected. So all in all, I would say that these two are quite forthcoming judgments. They are putting these two issues, one of party autonomy and second of enforcement of the award and understanding of the contract at a right position. and but let's see how it paves and pans out, and whether it ultimately helps to reduce the burden which the courts are facing right now. Just one, I'd like to just address one point which Percy mentioned on the last discussion about the arbitral institution, which is it resonates with me so much that Arbitration Act is a central act. But what is now happening that it's every state is making it as a state legislation. They're thinking that if Mumbai International Arbitration Center has come up, now DICA, Delhi has come up, Hyderabad is in making, Goa is coming up, Karnataka is coming up. I mean, every institute, and while there are many things we can learn from China, one thing we can learn, they have an institution called CTAC, and CTAC, mind you, they are running like literally 7,000 to 8,000 arbitrations per year. They are like it's like a institution for ad hoc arbitrations for the entire country. So what we really need to have a centralized institution. Even Vasant pointed out that we really need to have a centralized system, rather than every state having a fight against each other, who are better, which kind of a case we should go. I mean, first we were grappling with the fact whether you should take India as a seat or go outside. Now we will start grappling with the fact that should we have Delhi as a seat, or a Mumbai as a seat, or a Goa as a seat. So I think there are still gaping holes we really need to fill.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dipam, on those wonderful points and news from across the world. Gohar, coming to you for more on the kind of judgments that are forward-looking, and one being SPML Infra Limited versus NTPC Limited. So your thoughts on that, please.
So SPML, because we are short on time. SPML focused more on the issue of novation, or issue of whether if there is a settlement agreed in terms of a contract, whether the arbitration clause will survive or not, whether technicalities such as reference to an administrator would be seen or not. Court made it very clear that once the parties intended to settle the disputes through arbitration, it has to go to arbitration. So these, again, as earlier pointed out in the discussion we had, technicalities such as reference of the dispute to a identified individual under the contract would not non-suit a party on that basis, and therefore court went ahead and appointed an arbitrator. So that's what SPML brings about. That novation, etc., is not a concept, and these technicalities cannot come in the way of getting a dispute adjudicated by an arbitrator.
Absolutely. There's also another judgment that I had in mind, if any of the panelists would like to take that, which is the NN Global Mercantile Private Limited versus Indo-Unique Fame Limited. What is that judgment all about? Mr. Rajasekharan, would you like to share your views on that?
Basically, the SMST estate thing was sort of overruled in this judgment. And again, on the principle of competence, because arbitration agreement is severable from the main agreement. So you cannot put some restrictions, or you cannot look at some hyper technicalities to give effect to the arbitration agreement, because that is a fundamental right of the party to litigate. So you can't take away that right on some hyper technical grounds. So that is, yeah. Therefore, the competence principle was applied. The doctrine was applied to the tilt, and it's been left to the arbitral tribunal, because you can raise a challenge before the under section 16, you can raise whatever challenge you want to challenge before the arbitral tribunal, because competence principle squarely gives the power to the arbitral tribunal to decide on it. So therefore, it is again a right way to deal with, because increasingly Supreme Court is also not getting into the technicalities. They are saying that if they are looking only prima facie whether there is an arbitration agreement validly existing or not. The remaining things are being left to the arbitral tribunal to decide. So therefore, again, it's a welcome step, and it sort of overruled the SMST estate judgment, and all these technical objections are to be raised before the arbitral tribunal. That is again in line with the international principle, and our law is based on UNCITRAL. And again, we have taken a right step in bringing our jurisprudence in line with the international arbitration principles.
So basically, technical compliances will not get in the way of validity of an arbitration. Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of all the judgments that we had to discuss. We'll do another round of closing remarks from all of our panelists very quickly to sum up today's discussion and to have, if they had one key takeaway to share from where India is headed, we'd like to know from our panelists, starting with Mr. Billy Moria, please.
Right. So on the enforcement, the Gemini judgment also said that 48(1) subsection 1 clauses A to E have to be very narrowly construed. So I think it's again a move in the right direction where a foreign investor who's agreeing to arbitrate with her Indian counterpart is now today assured that the award will be enforced, and it will be enforced fairly rapidly. Previously, the trend was that it would languish in the Supreme Court for a number of years, but this is really the key change to my mind that has happened, and it's a welcome change. It aids commerce and international business. I am on the other side of the fence when it comes to domestic awards, right? And again, as I'm saying, I don't know how many people will say this outright, but I have no hesitation in saying it. Some of the domestic awards that one sees are horrid, right? And the problem here is if you leave aside some of the larger companies, multinational subsidiaries, or construction kind of contracts where there are PSUs arbitrating. So that's also international commercial arbitration, but domestic. If you leave that aside, a large number of arbitrations in India are where some small tiny business writes a arbitration clause saying that, it doesn't matter, I will appoint the sole arbitrator and it will all work out for me. And this is the reality. And we have to face this. We cannot just brush this under the carpet. I'm sorry. But the reality is that if you really want to boost arbitration, you have to ensure that the party who doesn't win in the award simply doesn't want a second bite at the cherry, because the award is so robust that he's not going to succeed. He knows that it's going to be a waste of time and money. And also now, the law clearly says that interest in the meantime shall count. So, you have to deposit the amount in court. And the question is that the interest accrued on that particular amount deposited before a challenge is entertained, that goes to the party who succeeds. So these are some very major issues that we face in domestic arbitration, and the problems are not really with the law, because I think the 96 Act is an excellent piece of legislation. The problems are really with the process, multiplicity of institutions being one of them, saying different things about what is arbitrable and not arbitrable. There have been so many decisions on the question of what can be arbitrated. The answer is very simple. The answer is anything which is in a public domain, which has a public implication, you cannot arbitrate. So you can an arbitration panel pass a divorce decree? No, right? But internationally, it is well accepted that until arbitrators internationally do not pass divorce decrees, but if there is a settlement agreement where there is an arbitration clause, then that settlement agreement is capable of arbitration. Now here, the courts seem to have a very blanket view to say that, okay, this is family law, so not capable of arbitration. I think we have to look a little beyond and say not capable of arbitration only in certain cases. And, surprisingly, there was a flurry of decision which said that landlord-tenant disputes are not arbitrable, right? And if you look at the crux of the matter, which now, in Vidya Drolia, Supreme Court has decided, the crux of the matter was if there is a landlord-tenant dispute governed by a specific law, right, which mandated that there is a particular court which will hear tenancy disputes. So there is actually a statute that overrides party autonomy in that case. And in such cases, you cannot have arbitration. But if it is beyond tenancy regulations, which are also, differ state to state, if it is beyond, then there is no reason why a rent agreement cannot have an arbitration agreement. So I think, in these situations, of course, Vidya Drolia, clarifies a lot on, what is arbitrable and what is not arbitrable. It's a very good judgment. But then, NN Global has referred parts of Vidya Drolia to a constitution bench. So, you see, the issue really is not with the law. The issue is that there has to be some kind of consensus in the judiciary on these very fundamental concepts. And right now, the consensus is absolutely that, look, we will not intervene unless absolutely necessary. So there's a reluctance. So sometimes you can see that the bench sympathizes with you when you are arguing a challenge to an award, right? And they are probably, wondering why and how these kind of awards are coming into being. But then they are reluctant to intervene because of party autonomy, and rightly so, because otherwise you will not have arbitration. Arbitration is a consensual process. You agreed to arbitrate, you must respect the award.
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that, right? But then if some awards are so bad, right, that it cannot possibly stand the test of justice, right? Then you get a second bite at the cherry, only in certain cases. Right. So, for example, evidence, appreciating evidence, no court of law in India today will intervene, even if it is misappreciated. Similarly, if a wrong ratio, so if two views are possible and one view is taken, they will not substitute their view for the view of the tribunal. So this is just as it should really be. But we need certain systemic changes to ensure that our domestic awards are of the same quality as one might expect in foreign jurisdictions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Bilimoria. Systemic changes being the word today, and what bold statements coming from the panel. So thank you so much, panel, for really sharing your views with us. Mr. Rajasekharan, in the interest of time, I would request our panelists to extend the discussion for 5 more minutes so we can have closing remarks from everybody. And Mr. Rajasekharan, over to you for your closing remarks on the same.
Just to add 2 cents to it, arbitration doesn't start from arbitral tribunal and doesn't end at the arbitral tribunal. So there is a pre-arbitration starting from interim relief to appointment, where we need to have a court's intervention. Then post-award or post-interim relief or post-emergency arbitral award, you need court's intervention for enforcement and execution. As Percy said, a lot of issues revolving around domestic arbitration, domestic award. Though we have a well-intended provisions of Arbitration Act, be it Section 34 or 48, but thing is, I'm very sorry to say, when we argue many matters before the district courts also for enforcement, or high courts, or even in Supreme Court, we don't have, starting from the judges to the arbitrators, we don't have the trained arbitrator mind, or a trained commercial nuances is completely lacking in many jurisdictions, across many jurisdictions of the high courts or district courts. So therefore, you can't expect complex construction nuances by the high court judge or a district court judge, or even a tired judge as an arbitrator. So we need to create an ecosystem where there may be a panel of arbitrators where technical input, practical input come from the industry expert, be it pharma, be it defense contracts, where we don't know the technology transfer. As a lawyer also, we don't know. So we need that sort of ecosystem to be created within the bar, within the bench, or within the arbitration bar, to sort of sensitize and upskill the culture of the bar and understanding. So that will go a long way in making India's arbitration hub.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rajasekharan. Great point on bringing experts as arbitrators on board. Gohar, your views on this?
I just have three small points, continuing from what Vasant sir was saying. One is that mindset that only judges can be arbitrator has to change. You have to have more experts, more industry practitioners doing arbitrations. Two is that one has to really show their disputes clause while drafting the agreement to your disputes lawyer. So please, one should do that. That helps you a lot, because prior to pre-litigation or arbitration, the first thing one has to see is the contract or the clause that really is going to play. So that, and lastly, I would say that as Percy rightly pointed out, that people have to respect the contract that they have entered into, and we often overlook a very small line in every arbitration clause. It says award will be binding on all the parties. We should respect that, and that should be a key takeaway for every person who has joined this conversation from a business perspective. Please respect your contract. Please respect the clause that you've entered into, and respect arbitration.
Thank you, God. Thank you so much. A great appeal there to the audiences. Divya, you started the discussion by having made the statement that there is a lot of madness added to the method. Now, what are your closing remarks in all of this?
I will just take a cue from what Vasant said about the ecosystem, and I'll just very quickly say two things which ties into Percy's point as well. One, we need an ecosystem where the arbitrators and all the judges are trained properly. For that, it's important to have a repository of awards, maybe in a redacted form. We Indians love to flaunt our journals. We have thousands of legal journals. One more this time on an arbitral awards will not hurt. And second, on the issue that the institutional arbitration, there should be one centralized institution mechanism which should govern everything, whether it's appointment of the arbitrators, providing specialized people to complex issues. All those things can be managed, but we have to work in unison there. We cannot be that everybody wants to just compete with each other when the world is competing on a greater level. There has to be one centralized institution. That's about it.
Thank you so much, Divya, and thank you so much, panelists, for sharing the wonderful insights on how India can be put on the map of arbitration. So thank you so much for joining us today, this Saturday. Thank you so much for all your views.